was turning at a 45-degree angle away from the flag during the flag salute
Whoa.
at a basketball game. But I'm not supposed to represent my.
So bagging groceries on base for just tips, no salary. Wouldn't even make enough in one day to buy a CD. So next thing you know, mom's is picking me up from jail for stealing CDs at Blockbuster. Back in the days when I was a teenager, minimum wage earning, rocking an apron. I was pushing hella cards, asking plastic CDs at Blockbuster. Plus, the days when I was relatively working in the minimum wage earning, rocking an apron. I was pushing hella cards, asking plastic CDs at Blockbuster. And I ain't even halfway there yet. It seems that we never get paid what our labor is worth. That's why we often in the days on the way to our work. And when we get there, we can't wait to be out. So let me tell you what it's about. And now we never get paid what our labor is worth. That's why we often in the days on the way to our work. And when we get there, we can't wait to be out. So let me tell you what it's about.
So you used to do telemarketing, right? 7 a.m. shifts on the West Coast means we're calling the East Coast. And on 9/11, this fool tries to fire me for refusing to make calls during the air.
The next place of employment's no better than this. My first day thinking this some fucking office space shit, but not me, boss. These conditions ain't suitable. Hide the pen and pad, writing rhymes in a cubicle. Automated phone, click, dial, tone, cold calling, hoping for some gullible folks to take the offer. A mission for commission, tuition for college. Please put our number on your do not call list. Half the whole staff graduated with honors, and you're trying to tell me telemarketing's your best job option? This shit is not popping, working to the bone, living at home, facing up debt and student loans. Now the manager's a tool and a clown, but productivity increases anytime he's nowhere to be found. In this tight-ass environment makes me wanna earl, like watching Flavor Flav tongue kissing old girl. Now we never get paid what our labor is worth. That's why we often in the days on the way to our work. And when we get there, we can't wait to be out. So let me tell you what it's about. And now we never get paid what our labor is worth. That's why we often in the days on the way to our work. And when we get there, we can't wait to be out. So let me tell you what it's about.
So like every job I've ever had, there's always been some kind of side hustle, whether it's sneaking into working at the paper. I was either slanging media guides or slanging them CDs, and just get above that minimum wage.
The .com phenomenon, fuck the city raw. Stock market falls down, 100,000 laid off. Got with Amazon.com. It had a lot of cross-dressers, goth cats, ex-cons, and single moms on the elevator up. My Walkman on, flash a badge for security, the mark of the beast. But with skills to persuade through speech, you'd be amazed to see how many customer service reps are MCs. At each instance, different job descriptions. What kept the brother going was the music that I listened to. Initiate the day with an anthem to work through. Then the supervisor started blasting Dave Matthews. Shit is bad news. Working for some assholes in suits, straight singing middle management blues. And so I quit on the last day of training. And when I got home, my notebook was waiting. I said we never get paid what our labor is worth. That's why we often in the days on the way to our work. And when we get there, we can't wait to be out. So let me tell you what it's about. And now we never get paid what our labor is worth. That's why we often in the days on the way to our work. And when we get there, we can't wait to be out. I told you what this shit is about.
Hello, good evening and welcome to tonight's online forum. I'm Callum Martin and I'll be chairing tonight for you. Welcome along to what is the third in the series hosted by the Lothians branch of the Scottish Socialist Party, exploring the case for a national care service. Over the course of the first two forums, we've heard from a fantastic range of speakers, medical and legal experts, trade unionists, campaigners, activists and journalists, including Dr. Alison Pollock, Derek Feely, Maria Bunting, Professor Jane Lethbridge, and many, many more. And many others who have each shared their perspectives on the case for a national care service and take the time to answer your questions that you've been sending in to us to explore that case. What would it look like? Why do we need it? Where does it come from? Now, both of those are still available to rewatch online. If you've not yet had a chance to check them out, you can find them both on YouTube and through the Facebook. Now, tonight's forum comes in the context of the result of a poll commissioned by the Scottish Socialist Party, showing overwhelming numbers of support for this issue across the country, including 69% of Scots supporting the creation of a national care service, publicly owned and funded from general taxation. Now, that figure speaks to an overwhelming support across all ages and backgrounds, including to the same poll, including 78% support from women over the age of 55. Now, to help us examine these results and continue to explore that case, we're joined by another two fantastic speakers tonight. We've got Colin Fox, the National Co-Spokesperson of the Scottish Socialist Party and a former MSP for the Lothians. We've also got Trish McLaughlin, a frontline care worker with experience of over 20 years in the sector. Now, we've got a slightly different format for you tonight. Two fantastic speakers, but a slightly different format. So there's not going to be a dedicated Q&A segment in the same way as the first two have. But if you do have questions, do continue to post them in the chat. We may still be able to put one or two of them to our guests tonight. And certainly we may be able to help provide answers for your questions in other ways, or perhaps in subsequent videos. Now, just before I bring in our guests tonight, it's important to say that these meetings don't just happen by themselves, nor do opinion polls, campaigning, or indeed the sorts of reforms that we need and indeed want to see. So if you want to help the campaign, you can donate online. And if you want to get involved in the campaign itself, there's no better way than to join the Scottish Socialist Party itself. There'll be links to both in the chat. And alternatively, if you're watching after the event, you can visit the website online at searching for the Scottish Socialist Party, either online or through the social media. And we'll start by putting some context to those figures. So Colin Fox, these polls show an overwhelming depth and breadth of support for this issue, including from across party lines. I think they saw up to 74% of SNP voters and even 54% of Conservative Party voters have expressed their support in this poll for this idea. So where do you see these polls as fitting into the campaign so far, the political context we're looking at? Oh, if I could just invite you to unmute yourself, Colin, there.
There you are. I usually have somebody do this for me. You know, I'm too important to unmute myself. I need a minion. But I was just saying, hi, Callum, hi, Trish, and hi, everyone else. I think that the poll you referred to, Callum, has been fantastic news for those of us who've been campaigning for a national care service, to show and to find that 70% of the population almost support a national care service that's free at the point of need, that's publicly owned and run, and that's fit for the 21st century, confirms the work the Scottish Socialist Party has been doing for many, many months. And I have to say, I met Trish McLaughlin at a stall the Scottish Socialist Party was doing in Princes Street, I think in December. And at that stage, we weren't clear whether we could say definitively that there was the majority that we felt there was in the street for that, plan. But Panel Base puts scientific polls together, and they put a result together at the weekend, which is really, really encouraging. And I think for me, this, as you said there, this is the third forum that the Scottish Socialist Party's had on the National Care Service. And I look forward to us having one again very soon when the Failure Review announces its findings, probably next week or the week after. And to me, Callum, there's two things that I'd want to try and go over in my initial remarks here. First of all, to show and to conclusively show that this is a service that's not fit for purpose the way it's currently configured. And the second thing is I want to touch on, there are many politicians in Scotland who say they're in favour of a national care service who actually aren't. And I think the failure report in a week or so's time is probably going to sort out the wheat from the chaff, those who are serious about change, transforming the situation we find, and those who want to keep the current position we're in. So the Scottish Socialist Party argues for a national care service, free at the point of need, publicly owned and run, and fit for the 21st century. And that three criteria hint at something, and that is that none of those three criteria currently apply. It's not free just now. It can't be free when it charges us up to £90,000 a year for the service. It's not publicly owned when 70% of the providers are private companies like HC1, Four Seasons, Barchester Healthcare, Care UK, Bupa, etc. And it can't be fit for purpose. And if we need any evidence about that, Callum, today's milestone, the milestone that Britain reached today with 100,000 people having died 100,000 people have died, and the figures show that almost 40,000 of those died in care homes. Now, if that's not a terrible indictment of a system that's in crisis and chaos, frankly, I don't know what is. And that's the point I think I want to leave you with just now. We'll come back to the others, Callum, when we get a chance to. So I'd very much look forward to what Trish has to say on the basis that she's a frontline worker on the coal face, as we used to say during the miners' strike. Well, this is somebody with years' experience, and I'm desperate to hear what she has to say and how she can enlighten us about what's actually happening day to day, hour to hour, in the care service in these circumstances.
Thank you, Colin. Colin referenced there the Feely report, which is the independent review into adult social care currently being conducted by former chief executive of, or chaired rather, by the former chief executive of NHS Scotland, Derek Feely, who himself provided a frequently asked questions video for the second of our forums so far. So if you want to check that out, you can see that in the second of the two forums. But first of all, Trish, first of all, thank you for joining us tonight, coming along and sharing your perspectives on this. So you first started work in the care sector around 20 years ago. Now, over the recent years, and in particular in the context of the current pandemic, how do you feel that's changed? Has there been sort of visible changes, do you think, in how that kind of operates at the front lines?
At its core, it hasn't changed. The job itself doesn't change. The principles don't change. It's more the coronavirus has shown us that there were faults, there were little niggles, if you want, and it's just expanded them so much, where shops are seeing problems with getting supplies and stuff, and so are care homes, so are carers. We now can't take in deliveries for personal care items and things because they have to go into quarantine. So it's really magnifying all the small things that folk would normally moan about and say, oh, see what happened today. It's just magnifying them so much where it can't continue like this. There needs to be something else, because although I work for a small company, when it's happening with big companies, it's happening across the board. And the small niggles are becoming big issues where if your boss has told you to do something, normal times, might not be happy, but folk done it. Whereas now they're telling you to do things and it's not. I've spoke to carers that are being told things that are in direct contrast with what the government is telling them. And they're having to choose who to listen to. And at the end of the day, the government aren't the ones that pay their wage, so they have to listen to their bosses. And it's really, it has to change, especially in the central belt where there are the big companies. The staff are doing their best, but all the little niggles are getting magnified to the point where they are now big issues. And a national care service would change that because it would unify the entire sector.
And Callum, can I just say two things? Trish raises a couple of points there I think they're really salient to this. The first thing she says is to remind everybody, this crisis in this care system in Britain and Scotland wasn't created by COVID. COVID has only merely exposed a system that's been in failure, probably since the way 30 years ago when Thatcher set it up, because that's what did. Thatcher deregulated the idea that care should be provided by hundreds of different companies. And I've been visiting care homes in the last few months and reading in the papers, and they say it's not just the failure of PPE that they didn't have. It's not just the fact that people were taken out of acute NHS hospitals and put into care homes that weren't fit to look after them. It wasn't just the waste management failures. It wasn't just the deficiencies in the management systems. It wasn't just the shortage of care staff like Trish, and the fact that a third of the entire care staff in Britain leave the profession every year. That's a terrible indictment, probably the worst indictment of a system in chaos. So I'd really concur with what Trish said is COVID didn't cause this crisis. Is unfortunately the case. This is a care service been in crisis for an awful long time. And the other thing she says, Trish is saying she works for a small company. It reminded me of some facts and figures I dug out, and I want to offer them early on in this discussion. There's 32,000 people in residential care homes for the elderly in Scotland on a daily basis, 32,000. The remaining 1,200 different private providers. So Trish works for one company. It's common for most of those providers just to have one care home, but there are 1,200 different private providers, going from, you know, HC1 and others who've got dozens and dozens down to the individual providers. And I say the service that we see in Britain today, Scotland today, is largely private, because 77% of the care is delivered by private companies, 77%. So you might as well say that it's private, and it can cost up to £1,600 a week, £1,600 a week to have somebody in residential care, which is the equivalent, as Alison Pollock pointed out at our last forum, of £90,000 a year. So it's inevitable in those circumstances that you're going to have an apartheid system between the rich and the poor. If you've got £90,000 a year, you can get treated at Randolph Hill in North Berwick, Fidra House in Edinburgh. But if you haven't, you don't. And so you've got a system that's based on private profit. And I don't care what other, you know, HC1 and all these big PR companies will say. The truth of the matter is they're in it to make money. They're not in it to provide care. They're there to make money, and they take the money, big money, in the case of HC1, and they take their profits and they invest them in the Cayman Islands where they don't have to pay any taxes. That's another shocking indictment of a system. I don't see how anybody can defend the current system that's largely private. We don't tolerate that with the NHS, do we? We don't tolerate, they've not tolerated that in the NHS since 1948. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no reason for tolerating it in the provision of care in Scotland in 2021.
It's a very good point of it, but Trish and Colin have both raised it. You know, a lot of the kind of issues here. So, you know, a lot of the need for improvement, the need for reform comes from issues which were in play before the pandemic. So, Trish, I mean, you mentioned there was kind of issues that were sort of, you know, already ongoing, sort of need for improvement, space for reform. I mean, how would you sort of describe those to sort of folk who aren't perhaps as familiar with sort of the work in the front lines?
I think the biggest one, the one that's certainly apparent to carers just now, is the wage. As we are minimum wage workers. I have a 17-year-old daughter who earns more than I do, and she stacks shelves in a supermarket. And I'm chuffed to bits at that. I'm delighted she's out the house. That's just fine. But it's more what sums it all up is when other sectors start to have mass unemployment, and MPs and other people come out and say, go and work in social care. And what they're saying is, we know they need people because people leave all the time just with the pressure of it. But rather than fix it, we're just going to throw people at it. And some of them will stick, but a third of them don't. And I was one of the ones that didn't. When I trained in the 90s, I left within 2 years. And it was only when I came back, I thought, it hasn't changed. You get support at grassroots level, at local level, with your shift and your line manager, your house manager. The support's there. Your team can be good, but it's beyond that. When you get care from other agencies, you get help from other agencies. There's no continuity, and there's no continuity between providers. So where we might have an issue with getting PPE in, and we sort that out, it would be much easier for everyone to do it at the same time. We talk about best practice for our residents, for our service users, but there doesn't seem to be a best practice for the staff, like for their needs. And the only way to do that is to have a national care service where you have banded wage. And although I work for a small company, I've always had a problem with big companies that count their profit in the millions, but if their staff are promoted, their wage increase is counted in pence. Their hourly wage increase is counted by pence. And because it's such an emotive issue, that's for the duties and stuff people have, especially when they work through the ranks of social care, the wages don't reflect it. They really, really don't reflect it. And that's why a lot of people leave, because they think, well, for me to have any kind of career progression, financially, it's not worth it. They have the duties of care, they have extra responsibilities, and they're being paid maybe 50, 60 pence extra an hour. And I think a lot of the time families and the people that fund the care don't realise that there are issues with social care that have been normalised.
And
I mean,
see the people that you know who've left the service, what were their reasons with it? Was it the stress?
The last one I spoke to went to work in a supermarket because she got paid more and didn't have to worry about sending people to hospital to die.
Mm-hmm.
That was her actual words.
Yeah.
Some of them, again, it is mainly where the bigger companies are. They just don't have the support. And although I know a lot of people that have left, there's going to be a lot more. See, when the pandemic's over, there will be a lot of carers that hold their hands up and say, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
Because you put us in a position that we didn't want to be in, and we're not ever letting anybody do that to us again. Mm-hmm. I'm incredibly fortunate as that I have an amazing team around me. But I'm speaking to carers in Glasgow and Edinburgh that are saying, we know what we're being asked to do isn't right. We don't have the support. But what else can we do? Because if we leave, they're going to bring somebody in that's not trained.
See, in your 20 years, have you ever done home care? So you've
very
always
briefly,
been working. Yeah.
Very briefly, when I was back in Glasgow, it wasn't something that I looked at when I came back to the industry, simply because I've always known people getting home care don't get enough time.
Yeah.
And the only people in terms of wages and stuff that are, let's face it, neglected as badly as home care providers, staff, are unpaid carers.
Yeah. And for people who are uninitiated, unlike yourself, so you've got people who work in care homes, and then home care is where you're going to visit people in their own home.
It's what we used to call in the old days the home helps.
Home help, yeah.
Right, we don't call it that anymore, but that's what they do.
Yeah.
And they've got maybe 15 minutes.
So you go, you see somebody for 15 minutes, you travel for 15 minutes to your next client, you don't get paid in between. Yeah.
And that's just checking someone's all right. That's not what we call person-centred care.
Yeah.
There's no way that's person-centred care. And it is mostly women that do it.
Yeah.
I know that there are guys that are working in care.
Yeah.
And I know quite a few of them, and they're brilliant at their jobs. But it is a female-dominated industry.
Well, you know what struck me when I was thinking about today? 20 years ago, so just back when you started in the care sector, 20 years ago, the Scottish Parliament voted to introduce free personal care for the elderly. So that's home care. So you would be visiting people in their home, and that was provided free. One thing that people should know in this conversation is Scotland's the only part of the UK where that's the case. You don't get free personal care in England and Wales or Northern Ireland. Scotland's had it for 20 years, so that when you were going to visit somebody in their own home, they don't pay for that. That's provided because it's paid for out their council tax or their taxes, local authority. And you know what struck me, Trish, this is probably something you reflect on. When it was established 20 years ago, it was unheard of. It was unheard of that care would be provided by private companies. It was local authorities who provided it. That's what it was decided for. And roll on 20 years later, home care today, 50% of the visitors to your house, so 50% of the care staff are now being privatised. They're now working for private companies, a plethora of different companies. My mum passed away 2 or 3 years ago. She was getting looked after at home, and she was getting obviously many women, devoted men and women who would say it brilliant. I don't have any criticism. I wouldn't dream of criticising them. They were great. But half of them were working for private companies, agencies, 0-hour contracts, getting paid for 15 minutes, travel to the other side of the town, no getting paid for the travel, 15 minutes there. And then they'd be working from early morning right through 12-hour shifts to make up their wages. So look how that service that we voted for as a country 20 years ago for free personal care has so deteriorated over 20 years that it's passed onto private companies making money out of it, and the rates of pay, the 0-hour contracts, the insecurity at work, the stress that you're under, having to sit in your car having a cup of tea because you're discouraged to go to Asda's cafe or that to get a break when your break time's on, It's absolutely shocking. I mean, these maybe conditions, my granda would be going absolutely through the roof at these conditions, to think that young men and young women are suffering things that the trade union movement fought against 100 years ago, because it's basically casualisation gone mad. I mean, I think there's every reason. I mean, this is what I'd put to you. A, are you not furious about that? And B, why the hell are everybody else not furious about it? Do you know what I mean?
I think a lot of it is because it's happened gradually. It's worn away drip by drip by drip. And as it's happened, it's less, there's less promotion of union membership now. I grew up in the 80s where people were in the union. When I said to my daughter that was something I wanted to bring up tonight, she went, "Is that not for nurses and teachers?" There's loads of carers in the private sector that don't realise they can be in a union, and they should be.
Yeah.
Because you've got somebody watching your back.
Yeah.
You're not on your own. You've got somebody that, one of your previous panelists said there were things in healthcare that carers won't talk about unless they're speaking to somebody else that works in healthcare. It's a sector thing. There's things that I won't say to somebody unless I know they work in a nursing home too. They've came across this as well. But that doesn't really apply to a union. That the unions are people you can say, this is happening, and they speak to people across the country. And the main reason I was doing this tonight is so that private carers do know you can join a union. You are allowed to join a union, because I've spoke to some that said, we're not allowed. Like, yeah, you are. And if they tell you you're not, you really should.
Lying. Yeah.
And now more than ever, you really do have to, because there's nobody else really that looks like it's going to back carers up. And the political and government and stuff, it's unions will have people's backs and they'll help carers at a time where they need them.
No, you're absolutely right. And see, one of the other things that came out of the panel-based poll last week, I think I sent you the figures, possibly the most encouraging statistic that came out of it for me was that the 69% support for, a national care service, free at the point of need, publicly owned and run, fit for the 21st century was really encouraging. But what made my heart sing is when you seen the statistics that showed women over 55 years of age, it rockets up to 78%. And the reason my heart sang is not just because of the increase, it's because that's what I would describe as the cohort in the country and the constituency who knows this service inside out. They know it better than anybody else, either because, like you, they work in it, or as something we're probably not aware of as much as we should be, they're also the people who are going and visiting their mums and dads every week in the care home. They're catering for their needs. They're taking them things in all the time. It's almost like they're always there too. And so women over 55 years of age have suddenly got a realization they've got their mum and dad to look after as well as their kids. They're the generation in the middle. No wonder they're stressed. No wonder they're looking for ways out of stress. I'll say euphemistically, leave it at that, right? That was fantastic for me because they're the most intelligent, well-informed cohort of the community about this. And that's where I think the driver, the political pressure for change is coming from that part of the constituency, that part of the population. And that's superb because we were talking when I met you about the anti-poll tax campaign, Pollock and elsewhere 30 years ago, whenever it was, right? And I can tell you, women of that generation were the mainstay of that campaign too.
I remember my wee gran she was a big fan of it.
Yeah.
And she was
so
this tiny wee woman that never spoke
you get women who've got life's experience involved in a campaign. Look out, here comes trouble. And that's what we need. We need that sense of things have got to change, and they've got to change profoundly. More tinkering around, no more diddying around restructure and things like that. Right. There's got to be profound change. So what would you do to make things change? What would you seek to do to improve it? as well as the wages and the conditions, about
Aye.
thinking of the job you do when you get to your work. How would you say, look, Trish, if you had a magic wand or 3 wishes, what would be the things you'd do to improve the provision of care to our elderly, our senior citizens, who took us through the wars, who took us through the battles, who need their rewards looked after? What would you do?
The care that's being provided now is the best that the carers are providing, but in a wider scope, I just feel that, and we're seeing it firsthand just now, people shouldn't be taken out of their communities and put somewhere. I live in a small town. We have people that have lived here all their lives. They've been mayors, they've been this, they've been that, they've been trade union leaders, they've been everything. But there's no guarantee when those people need care that they can stay in their neighbourhoods. They might not be able to afford it, and it'll be the same across the whole country. I would keep care in local communities, and it really would be, people say it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a community to take care of your elders, to take care of the people that need care. It takes a whole community. And we're seeing that firsthand now, that when people don't have access to their wider communities, it's having a detrimental effect on them. It really, really is. And it's heartbreaking. But there's nothing.
Do you think the coronavirus and the reportage about it and people's attention has made the average community, average person in, say, your community or mine, more aware of care homes, more aware that they've got them in their community, more aware what they do? Yeah, that's got to be a good thing, surely, then, eh?
I'm asked. Well, we don't see a lot of people. I do night shifts, so I don't really see a lot of people on my way to or from work. But more in the mornings, it'll be, how's every day at your work? And obviously people know you can't talk about residents. But it'll be, we're doing fine. And before that, it wasn't really there. It was out of sight, out of mind, almost. People knew that folk worked there.
And people generally get more respect for the work that you do. So if they know you're a care worker and all that, do they treat you differently now? They get more kind of awareness of what you do and more respect for it and get a regard.
The one thing you hear more and more often is, I couldn't do that. And my answer is the same for as every carer out there. You would if you had to.
I'm not sure they're right. I'm not sure you're right, actually. I've seen it. I've seen what you do, right? And I think you've got empathy in abundance. You've got patience in abundance. I think care workers are maybe not aware of what you have within you, and the patience and I read the book. We talked about it in the first forum we had when we had Madeline Buntas with us, Callum, remember? Madeline Bunt wrote this book called Labours of Love, and she talked about something I want to put to you, which is about time. And time to spend with people. If this is a person-to-person service, isn't it? This is human-to-human. It'll never be done by computers. It will never be done by electronic wizardry, because it's a human being-to-human being thing, and it can only ever be that. And she talked about, in this book, Labours of Love, about a woman, I think it was an African woman, a woman from Zimbabwe, came to Britain, worked in care and the rest of it. And she talked about the different care homes she'd worked in. And they were all pretty much the same until she goes to one and they had a proper, like you said, their career development. So this woman, I think her name was Mercy or Justice or something like that, who she's referred to in the book, might be a right name, doesn't really matter. But she said in this role that she went to, she was a development worker. It was to find stimulus. It was to do, you've got to do basic things every day. You've got to feed people. You've got to clean them. You've got to look after them. You've got to make sure they're hale and healthy and looked after. Then on top of that, you've got to stimulate them. You've got to keep them aware, talking and singing and petting the llama and doing all these things that they do. And she said the difference between the care homes that she went to that were fantastic places to work in is that they did have the llama brought in. They did, and it always struck me as, so you move from being a carer and your career pattern can be, well, not any different for other, but you're doing a different role. And it seemed to me it's about time. If you've got the time to spend with one of the residents, it makes all the difference in the world, as opposed to if they're just getting basic care and maintenance, they're getting washed and cleaned and fed, washed and cleaned and fed, washed and cleaned and fed. Occasionally they talked about Coronation Street. That's not what this job should be, surely. Surely it should be stimulating people, keeping them, you know, mentally alert, keeping them full and active as they can be, don't you think?
It absolutely should. And in residential care, that is the person-centred care and best practice that people aim for.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same point, that's also the same thing that should be provided in home care.
But seeing
and it's not, and because it's all the one sector, that's why we need something like the National Care Service, where, you know, the roles, duties and training available to people working in residential are also available to people. We could have like the world's best activity coordinator and not know it, because he's sitting in his car driving from one town to the next and doing 15 minutes in people's houses, and not have the opportunity to find out where their talents really, really lie. I mean, when they're talking about other sectors joining social care, and they keep talking about transferable skills, there's transferable skills in social care that will take you into a lot of other sectors. Because when I left, I ended up going to work as an activities coordinator, but I always seemed to find my way back to social care. I was, you know, looking back, it's like I was always meant to be coming back. It just so happened that I had to be away for a while. It's just all these things you're talking about, we can't do them just now. And we haven't been able to do them for nearly a year. We haven't been able to bring people in. We can't even sing just now. That's the bit that's getting folk, is we're not allowed to sing Christmas carols. We hummed quite loudly under our masks. I'm going to be honest, and we all held our hands up and says, "I'm not telling so and so not to sing, because the door's shut. I can hear them, but I don't know it's them that's singing." It comes down to something as simple as that, and that was when it really struck us that the impact that everything that the last year has happened, how severe the aftermath is going to be, is when we start doing things again that we haven't done for a year or however long it goes on for. When we start bringing in activity coordinators again, when we start bringing in the choir, or, you know, the brownies come in, or, you know, people come in to visit, or whatever. That's when we'll realise how much we've missed. And that's time that our residents and our service users, we can't replace that for them. We're doing the best we can, but especially in the early days of the pandemic, we couldn't even put on the news. We had like essentially a ban amongst the staff that the people getting care were getting so upset at what the news was telling them that we had to ban news channels. I mean, we've had music radio. I mean, it's literally been no news, nothing for months, because when people have access to so much information from the outside, it's hard to explain why they can't actually have access to people.
Yeah.
Because they don't want the information, they want people.
Yeah.
We're mammals, essentially. We're communicate with each other, we respond to touch. And it is hard when, you know, everybody's basically coated in plastic.
Well, Callum's certainly a mammal. What do you want to say, Callum?
Yeah, I was just going to bring in a question from the audience. So first of all, just to mention there, Colin referenced Madeline Bunting. That was in the first of the series of forums here, the book Labours of Love. I believe it's still available for sale and comes highly recommended. The second point there is one of the questions that has come in once or twice and a few times during the chat to our first two forums, just to bring into play here, is in fact two parts. The first is, obviously with the lockdown, a lot of visiting is kind of barred, not possible. Do you think that kind of at the moment there is enough sort of provision of kind of, you know, ways of making that contact possible sort of through kind of Zoom and sort of things as, you know, as much as can be done? And the second sort of follow-up question to that is, a number of folk have kind of asked this point, and I think Madeline Bunting touched on this as well. This question of, you know, obviously there's kind of been a number of times that the lack of resources, shortage of available resources has been really highlighted during this crisis. Do you think that there were a lot of, sort of resource shortages before in terms of how resources were being deployed within the private sector, or do you think that's been something that's been particularly exacerbated by COVID? If that makes sense.
I think it's been exacerbated by COVID. It's supply and demand. You had your regular supplies. Everybody had their routine. One place got their stuff this day, one place got this, and then you had basically every home care service, and probably quite a few other people from other sectors try to get their hand in, and everybody's calling for stuff at the same time. We've been quite lucky where I am, as we haven't really had any major problems. But similarly, we're hearing about places that really, really have, very local places that really, really have. The Zoom one's an interesting one. I'm 43 and I'm not entirely comfortable doing Zoom. So for some residents and service users, they're learning new technologies, and it's interesting. It's fun. We have, where I live now, we have the iPads, we have computers, we have phone conversations, and we're doing absolutely everything we can for people to keep contact with their loved ones. But it doesn't replace the visits. And right now it is difficult because people quite understandably are getting to a point where the difference between I'm going to visit my mum, my dad, my granda, whatever, to I need to see them. The need for that contact when they can't even leave where they live because of lockdowns and stuff. And a lot of the time, carers, and I've spoke to several carers, said it, they spend half their day on the phone with somebody trying to convince them not to break lockdown. Like to say, if you leave your house and come as far as you're coming to see whoever, you could be stopped by the police. And most of us know, they'll maybe get a slap in the wrist, but they'll not get into big trouble for that. Everybody would understand. But that's time that should be spent with service users. And again, it's the same as people always knew, for people having home care, a lot of the time the carers that they saw might be the only people they see that day. And then there's cases coming up where carers are finding out at short notice they need to go into isolation. And that's why there's such a shortage, because it's happening now and it's happening at really short notice. So they're not having continuity of people.
I was just going to kind of broaden the discussion out a wee bit and ask Trish, I met you in December. We were campaigning, as I said, in Princess Street, and you signed the petition. You identified yourself as a care worker with experience, and that's why we got in touch with you. What's your feeling about the wider population? So the people that you know, I mean, I take it the vast majority of care workers like yourself are in favour of a national care service, free at the point of need, public owned and run, fit for the 21st century. But what about the wider population? What's your feeling about those people that are not directly involved in it, like you, who are looking at it from afar, the families of people that you meet, your own family, people like that? What's their feeling, do you think, towards it?
It seems to be something that people don't really almost want to think about until they have to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't think about having to provide care. And unfortunately, when people do have to start thinking, we're going to have to get care for someone, the first thing that comes up time and time again, do we need to sell our house?
Yeah.
Because they've got this image in their head that you spend all your money on care and then somebody provides what's left, but you spend all the money on care. And I actually know family members that recently almost didn't buy a house because what if our partner needed care? She'll just lose the house.
Yeah.
And you think that's not right.
No.
Most of I think the general population don't understand the sheer volume of companies involved in providing care, and that there's differences in that each one does it slightly differently. And certainly aren't aware of how much these companies are making.
I mean, my feeling is, I think you're absolutely right there. You and me and other activists, people who want to see this, we've got to make sure that we keep getting the information out there about what is the reality. And that's why your contribution tonight is crucial to this, because it's okay me talking about it from afar. It's people, like I described you as the cold face, that's really, really important. I mean, I don't have any doubt, push comes to shove, my feeling is I think there is an overwhelming majority of people out there who want to see the National Care Service as we describe it. My worry is, and this is what I think this leads to sort of more political questions. There's a certain amount of double speak out there by the political classes. So the politicians out there, I've heard politicians talking about a national care service, but then they're not specific about the details, what it means. It seems very vague. It's like a nice woolly phrase. That seems warm. It's like mother's milk and apple pie, but they don't go and spell out that these are complex questions. These are political choices that's got to be made. There's political choices about how's it to be delivered, how's it to be paid for, as you said there, and how does the quality standard get guaranteed? You know, the deficiencies in the care inspectorate in Scotland are profound. They don't have the staff to make the inspections, but when they do the inspections, 40% of the facilities they inspect, last year, 40% of them failed and were described as inadequate or poor. So the key question I was going to try and focus on this second part of the meeting and ask you, Trish, is the politicians that you've heard talking about the National Care Service, they never then go on to describe, they never follow up that we do with the mantra, free, publicly owned, fit, so it's free, public and fit. That's the T-shirt, right? Free, publicly owned, fit for the 21st century. And I think that let me give you two examples, for example, right? The two most important politicians in Scotland as far as this issue is concerned, one, Nicola Sturgeon, second one is Jean Freeman. She's the health minister, right? Let me give you a quote that Nicola Sturgeon said this on the 1st of September last year, delivering her programme for government. She says, the pandemic has underlined the need for improvement and reform of the social care sector. And she admitted that the government needed to build a service fit for the 21st century. This is what she said. She said, the National Health Service was born out of the tragedy of World War II. Let us resolve that we will build out of COVID-19, this crisis, a lasting and positive legacy of high quality national care service that can be a lasting positive legacy from the corona crisis, right? That was last September. But last week, Jean Freeman, the health secretary, Nicola Sturgeon's health secretary, told the private sector's care home gathering that they have once a year, this year it's online, that she said she made it clear the SNP does not support public ownership and does not foresee the public sector taking on social care responsibilities in Scotland. My view, she said, is that private providers add real value. We need to distinguish between a national care service and a nationalised care service, she insisted. I do not support a nationalised care service run by the state. I can work happily with private providers. So ask yourself, how do we reconcile what Nicola Sturgeon said in September with the mood music that had to be radical change, like the NHS, where references to 1948, with Jean Freeman saying last week that you can stuff the idea of it being publicly owned, you can stuff the idea of it being private, or free rather, and you can stuff the idea consequently that it's fit for the 21st century. That's my worry. And I tell you, it looks like, because the Feely report is due out next week, and the next Scottish Socialist Party online forum will be about that. And I happen to think there's going to be a bloodbath, because it presages a conflict between either you're for public ownership, like the Scottish Socialist Party, or you're for private ownership of this service, like the SNP. And I say that with some passion in my voice, because I only live a few hundred yards away from the Royal Hospital for Sick Kids in Edinburgh at Little France, right next to the new Royal Infirmary, which the SNP has privatised. It's owned by a company called the Macquarie Capital Group of Sydney, Australia, one of the most voracious privatisation companies on the planet. The company itself is called IHSL, Integrated Health Services Lothians Limited. And when we campaigned in the SSP against the privatisation of the Royal Infirmary, the SNP was against the Labour's privatisation of the Royal Infirmary. Now, when the SNP privatise things, they say Labour's PFI is bad, but the SNP's PFI is good. Now, that's rank hypocrisy. And I think one of the things I feel strongly about is the vast majority of the public in Scotland have had the whirlpool over their eyes, thinking that the Royal Infirmary, the Sick Kids Hospital in Edinburgh, belongs to us, and it belongs to a mob in Sydney, Australia, who are charging us 3 times what it would have cost to build this for ourselves. And you think, what's the cost to sick kids of that deficiency in revenue for the NHS, you know? So the question I want to pose to you is, what do you feel people are saying when you've heard the politicians speaking? What is it do you think they're saying when they're saying they're in favour of a national care service?
The main thing I'm hearing people saying is they're not telling the truth, we just don't listen anymore. And that's the God's honest truth. When politicians say stuff, we're like, oh, we hear it, and then we dismiss it because they're going to change their mind about something. On a basic level, I don't agree with companies outside the country owning something as important as hospitals or care services in our country, because they're not here, they're faceless. You know, that's just my feeling. But to be honest, as the person on the street, people just don't believe politicians anymore. They know it's sound bites. They know they're saying it for the clicks or the shares or whatever, and we just don't believe them.
So you don't think that care staff like yourself, you don't expect them to deliver this publicly owned, free at the point of need?
Honestly, I think it'll happen. We've had precedent. We got the NHS. Mm-hmm. That was, when you look back on history, you just look back and think, it couldn't have not happened. I just think politicians are saying the right things at the right time because they've been told to. It's like, we'll say this because these people will be listening now, or the statistics say that this is the group of people that are watching. I'd like to be wrong, but I honestly think it's inevitable because something has to happen. And the only other option is more privatisation. It can't be privatised more. It's as private as it's going to get. You know, it's owned by hundreds of different companies, hundreds of different people, and it's not working. So you go the other way to it's owned by everyone, and everyone contributes through their taxes. Everything's standardised. The rates of pay are standardised. People aren't having to sell their houses. People aren't having to go through their life savings. And as soon as people start to contact about care, as soon as care starts to be provided, it's free from that point on, because it's not about money, and it's not about sound bites, and it's not about politicians. It's about dignity of life. Mm-hmm. And it's dignity of life for service users and the people providing it. And over the last 20 years, that's the bit that's been forgotten. It's the dignity of the people that are providing it. At the point now, I have 3 adult children. It would break my heart if one of them went to work in social care, because I know what it's like. I want better for them. And I never thought I would say that.
It's exactly like every miner used to say about their laddie. They never wanted a laddie of theirs going down the pit. It was dangerous. It was badly paid, and there was got to be better jobs up ground. I mean, that's really part of the challenge we have to do, is because this is so important. You know, social care is so important. There was was it Madeline Bunt or somebody? I came across a quote from I think he's the governor of the Bank of England, was speaking at Oxford, and they're talking about where the economy was going. All these jobs are getting lost in retail and newspapers, and what are people going to be working in the future? And his answer is, the future employment of the world, social care. That's the growing industry. People are getting older. The baby boom generation like me are retiring. They're going to need social care. And what he posited, or he suggested, was, wouldn't it be fantastic if the kids coming out of Oxford and Cambridge University had a quotient to passing their exams about their compassion intellect, their ability to understand human-to-human relations, never mind Greek mythology and Latin and the law and all that crap. What if they understood the importance of human-to-human communication and support? And so when you think about, you know, imagine people, what's it going to take, for example, for you to have a complete revolution in your mindset and saying, I'd love my kids to get into social care. It's so rewarding. It's so important to the recipients. It's so life-fulfilling for the people who deliver it. It's well paid. It's secure. There's a career pattern. Instead of having the ideas that you go into banking, finance, you know, the law, Ally McBeal and all that pish, you went towards delivering something for other human beings. Now, wouldn't that be a world?
There is a sector where several members of several generations of my family have worked, where very different people, very different skills, very different interests, had great career progression, basically found their thing, found their place. And I would love my kids to have that in social care. But those other people in my family work for the NHS. That's the only way that people, carers now looking at the industry, would be delighted to see their kids following in their footsteps. If it had the scope, the range, the career progression, and quite frankly, the respect's not the right word, the recognition that the NHS has. The NHS has went from this, you know, service that started in the 40s to a world leader. I certainly, in the age that I grew up, it was like every country in the world was jealous of us because we've got an NHS.
No, they still are.
You know, there's innovation there, there's research, and the possibilities that a national care service could bring to care is an area that a lot of carers probably won't even think of, because it's actually quite emotional. And it's the research and the innovations for some of the situations that we're helping people through, like dementia, palliative care, things like that. It's
world leading. I mean, if you think about where the NHS came from, right? Where the NHS came from to where it is today, and you're right. I mean, you're right, absolutely right. Never mind what the rest of the world thinks of the NHS. The NHS has been for a long time, decades, the institution that the people of Britain hold in the highest regard. It's not the Scottish Parliament, it's not the Dole, it's not the Polis, it's the National Health Service, right? And here I have to say, my ambition is to take the National Care Service, or the model of care that we have in Scotland today, because we don't have a National Care Service. That's one of the realities we're dealing with. So the model of care, my ambition is to take it from being something we're ashamed of, you know, that we're ashamed of the way we treat it. We're ashamed of the way we treat the staff and the people in it. Take it from there and make it something that we're proud to have as the best in the world. That's what the National Care Service is about for me. Taking it from this level, where we don't talk about it, to a level where we sing about it through our masks because it's the best in the world. That's what it's about for me. And I wonder, this is perhaps the final question to you. Do you think there's any chance that the genie is out the bottle in the sense that 35 to 40,000 people have died in care homes in Britain in the last year? 35 to 40,000. That's the equivalent, if I check my figures, of the entire care population in Scotland. So every single one of them, that's the equivalent, every single one of them has died. Do you think there's any chance that the genie is out the bottle in the sense that this has got to have been for something? For God's sake, this has got to have been for something other than going back to the way things were. Do you think there's any chance of that? Do you have any?
I think it will, and I think it'll come from the carers themselves. And it'll come from the families of carers, not so much for the people in care, but from the families of carers that say, we watched them go to work every day and come home and greet, or been too scared to go to the shops. And we're, you know, it's the same for every carer. We've got all of these wee fears that turn up into one big fear. And that conversation won't start until the pandemic's over. It might already be happening in staff rooms, but outside of the industry, outside of the sector, carers won't speak out until they know it's safe to do so. And right now, it's not, because our first priority is the people in our care. And no disrespect even to any of yous, that's our first priority. Everything else can wait.
No, that's fair. And see when the pandemic's over, what are care staff and families going to say to those politicians in the private care sector who are going to say, what's it going to cost? How are you going to pay for it? Who's going to take it off HC1? Jean Freeman? Who's going to take it off Four Seasons? Nicola Sturgeon? Who's going to take it off Barchester Healthcare? Who's going to take it off the pot? Boris Johnson? So when you encounter those obstacles, and by Christ, there's obstacles, these people haven't changed their, they haven't changed their skin in the last year. Still, the people who, stand by the deficiencies. So what are care staff and families and the population as a whole going to have to do to persuade those people I've mentioned the error of their ways and the need for profound change?
When that time comes, I don't think it'll be the carers that say, how do we change this? And it'll have to be the general public. There aren't enough carers to be loud enough. But afterwards, the carers will say, we done our best, did yous? It'll be that blunt. It's, we done our best. So now you do your best. You put other people first. Don't put profit first. Don't put political ambitions first. You need to do what's right for people. And it's really, there's no other model that's right that is going to fit the way the future could be.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. My feeling is, I've been saying this for months, this is an idea whose time has come. It's tragically taken the COVID pandemic and 35,000 people in care homes and 110,000. God knows where that's going to stop, because it's not just stopping today. It'll go on to probably 120,000, 130, God knows, heaven forbid, but it looks like that's the direction it's going, right? But my feeling is, you talked about the Second World War. Remember, the Second World War, the carnage, the destruction, the killings, the bloodshed. It's almost like people arrived at the end of that journey, and God knows it was a terrible one, and they planted a flag in the ground as, this means we're not going back to the way things were before the killing started. So my feeling is the same. It's like 100,000 people died, and people in Britain, right across Britain's conviction will be, we're not going to accept going back to the way things were before the first person died. There's got to be profound changes here. And I think I've been in politics long enough to know, we talked about the anti-poll tax campaign. You can feel there's an earthquake round your feet. You can feel it. There's no way this is going to be going back to the way things were on the 26th of January last year when the first person died. There's just no, it's not going to happen. It's just, you can tell. And I happen to think that's what the politicians are worried about. Nicola Sturgeon's already on record as saying, and she's probably the craftiest of all the politicians we've got in Scotland, she's saying she accepts it's been the biggest failure of her time in politics. And I think it was Commonweal, wasn't it, Callum? What was the quote for Commonweal? Commonweal, who said what?
The greatest failure of the devolved era.
Yeah, exactly. The greatest failure of the Scottish Parliament in 22 years has been the COVID pandemic, the care home deaths and COVID-19. That's the greatest failure. God knows they've had plenty of other failures. I was there for 4 years. I can point to plenty of other failures, the wasters, but they're probably right. This is by far and away the worst failure in the Scottish Parliament's history, because this shouldn't have happened. Not to this degree. People who've died prematurely when they shouldn't have, and they've died in conditions where they didn't have the solace of their loved ones beside them in their last hours. That's heartbreaking. That's a nightmare, because that's what we all hope for in the end, isn't it? That you die with your family round about, you're able to say your goodbyes, and that was denied 35,000, 40,000 people. That's shocking.
Well, fantastic. I'm afraid that's about all we've got time for tonight. So just a reminder, very call reference to the political earthquake that'll take to change. As Trish has mentioned, that after the COVID, there will need to be a real earthquake to transform the situation to really deliver this reform. So just that reminder, don't just leave it to the politicians or the investors You can find out more, you can get involved, you can donate to the campaign through the links that are in the chat if you're watching it live, or through the online website if you're watching after the event. So I'm afraid that is all about time we've got time for tonight, folks. If I can just start to wrap things up by saying thank you so much to Trish and to Colin for joining us in tonight's forum as we've continued to explore the case for the National Care Service. Thank you also to our tech team and our admins and the various chat threads, keeping all the links there and fresh and going up and answering questions where they can. And thank you most of all for all of you at home for tuning in and continuing to submit your questions, for really taking this conversation, spreading it out. And just a reminder that the links to tonight's forum and the previous two will continue to be available afterwards, as will a range of kind of further information, graphics, for example, on the contents of the poll that's come out. Do share those widely if you can to folk who you think would be interested in sharing this conversation, passing on that case for the National Care Service. There's also just a mention there of the next forum. So this is obviously the third in a series. Our next forum will be coming up in February. We'll be looking at the next steps for the campaign for the National Care Service following the publication of the Feely report, which we will see the contents of in due time. So until then, my final thanks to Colin and to Trish for coming along tonight, for having a really fantastic, valuable, insightful conversation. And until that next forum, I've been Callum Martin. Have a wonderful night, everyone at home.